Good afternoon. And today we have a huge pleasure to interview my favorite TED Talk presenter, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. Good afternoon, Jill.
Oh, I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
And first of all, thank you to our audience. If you have trouble sleeping or sleep next to the snoring partner, this talk would be great for you because we're going to talk a lot about insomnia and what to do in case if you have a racing thoughts and you cannot sleep. If you're a medical professional and just like us, you're trying to help people who cannot enjoy process of sleeping or who cannot sleep in general, this talk is going to be for you because we're going to focus on a different strategy, how to talk to different generations, depends on the influence of the left or right side of the brain, and present them a treatment in an efficient and successful way. And I'm going to give my own little story about Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. As you know, I'm a big proponent of TED. I find this community and impact of this intellectual stimulation I get from a TED Talk so significant. But my favorite talk was from our guest today. And we're going to talk about that as well. She actually witnessed her own stroke. And she shared the story about changes in her brain in her TED Talk, which is most popular TED Talk in the history of TED. And also she has a wonderful book about that. But in addition to that, we're going to talk about her new book called Whole Brain Living. And that is such an impactful book. It made me a better clinician because I understand what the different generations has a different influence of the brain dominance, I would put it. And now I reshape the strategy of my conversation with the baby boomers and Gen X and millennials and Gen Z, as well as with the young alpha generation, taking into consideration what may be the right part of the brain and influence of the game's dominant for them. And my first question to you regarding your TED Talk, can you share in a small world? Of course, I recommend everybody to watch the TED Talk, and we're going to put the link under the interview, your whole stroke experience and how it changed your life, your perception of your own brain.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, thank you. And thank you, everyone. So I grew up to study the brain because I have a brother diagnosed with the brain disorder schizophrenia. So I became fascinated with how is it this guy and I can have the exact same experience, but walk away with different interpretations about what happened. And so eventually my brother would be diagnosed with schizophrenia. So I became fascinated with how does our brain create our perception of reality? What's going on in there? And I'm an anatomist. I became a gross anatomist of the human body. So I study the human body. I study the tissue, the cells, and I specialize in neuroanatomy, so the anatomy of the brain. So I was teaching and performing research at Harvard Medical School, and I woke up one morning and I was experiencing a major hemorrhage in the left half of my brain. And through the eyes of a scientist, I didn't know what was going on. All I knew was I was having this pounding pain and I was gaining these odd perceptions of reality. But I'm a neuroanatomist. I'm a PhD, not a medical doctor, MD. So I don't have a lot of experience with different stroke types of stroke patients, but I have studied stroke in the books, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I eventually realized that I was having a stroke. And so I ended up with a front seat row of watching through the eyes of a neuroscientist, the circuits in my own brain deteriorate one by one to the point where after 4 hours, I could not walk, talk, read, write, or recall any of my life. I was completely an infant in a woman's body. And through the eyes of a scientist, it was really fascinating to watch this process. But then I had these problems, and it took 8 years for me to recover. But I had brain surgery, and they removed a blood clot the size of a golf ball from the left hemisphere. And so I shifted from having a whole brain to losing my left hemisphere, and I became completely right hemisphere dominant. And so I really got to know through the eyes again of a neuroanatomist what is actually going on inside of the right hemisphere versus the left hemisphere. And then it took 8 years for me to completely use my right hemisphere to rebuild the circuits of my left hemisphere so I could become a functional human being again.
You know, you just imagine, like for me, it's beyond fascination. You can imagine how many times in my head I was playing, what you just said. I listened to your TED talk many times, and I love the fact that you have a brain behind you, what you brought the actual brain to the TED scene, and everybody cannot forget that. But I was just wondering how you just sitting and observing changes in you without dialing 911. So
Well,
that's like,
911 is actually information in a group of cells in my language center, which is right behind, my mathematics center, right behind my language center. And that happened to be the site of where the blood vessel exploded. So those cells didn't exist anymore. So anything that they knew, it was gone. So 911 did not exist for me.
this is like for me as a doctor, it's a magical. But I'm want to go back to the new book, what I absolutely love, Whole Brain Living. I highly recommend our audience to read your book about stroke. But I want to talk about your new book, Whole Brain Living. I want to ask you, tell us what inspired you to write the book, and can you introduce us to those 4 characters, what you describe so well in this book in the different aspects of life?
Yes. So I was invited to give the TED talk, and I gave the TED talk, and that was before TED was TED. Because by the time I was invited, I never heard of TED. I didn't know anything about it. And in fact, my TED talk was the first TED talk that exploded into the internet. So Ted and I, that's my claim to fame. Ted and I became famous together. So that was exciting. But the TED talk takes you on the journey of my stroke into my own mind, and it's remarkable. It's unlike anything that anybody's ever reported before. But it missed the point for me, because the point for me was, I wanted people to walk away from that talk with a reverence for themselves, for their life, for the wonder of what we are, for the knowing that we can be right hemisphere dominant, we can choose to be left hemisphere dominant based on the values of those 2 hemispheres. And although people walked away with a reverence for me and this experience, they didn't apply it to themselves. And so for me, it was like, how do I communicate this in a way that people will really get it? And so then I realized that people think they understand we have 2 cognitive brains. The right hemisphere, we talk about it, it's creative, it's open, it's innovative. The left hemisphere thinks linearly, and it has rational thought, it has a language. So people understand we have 2 cognitive minds, but we were under the influence that we had 1 amygdala, 1 hippocampus, and 1 emotional system. And it was like, no, we are bilateral. We have 2 amygdala, 2 hippocampi, 2 limbic systems in each hemisphere that are completely different based on the differences between the 2 hemispheres. And once I realized that, then I knew that people could understand that we have 2 cognitive minds, we have 2 emotional brains, modules of cells, and we can actually pick and choose who and how we want to be. We can pick and choose where we want the energy to go into our brain. So once we can identify these different parts of our brain, then we get to choose who and how we want to be. And they're all very different, and we can get to know them, and then we can listen to these conversations inside of our head. We can bring them into conversation with one another in a tool I call the brain huddle, BRAIN acronym huddle. And that's why you're talking to me today, because when you understand what's going on, then it becomes easier to identify, well, which character is keeping me awake at night, or which characters are in the way of my ability to shut it all down and really embrace sleep. And sleep, I'm like the number one advocate on the planet for sleep. Sleep is so important because it's when we sleep that all the input coming in, not all of it, but most of the input coming in shuts down. And then the systems of our body, they get to rejuvenate and regenerate. They get to clear out the waste. They get to bring food everywhere. And it's like the reset button. And when we have good sleep, then we function better.
Of course, I remember you were the first one who, let's call it, diagnosed sleep apnea for our friend, Mr. Terry Moore. And I remember how he described, we had that interview of him when he talked about that experience with you, when he shared with you what he see terrible, such a nightmare with the geometrical figures. And you said, you have to check for sleep apnea. And that was true, and it was a sleep apnea. I find that fascinating as well. So for our audience who did not read your book as of yet, but I highly recommend them to read Whole Brain Living, I want you to explain. Somebody does not sleep, and he wants to invite those 4 characters.
Yes.
And, calm all of them down or identify. Can you share that, give some hints how that huddle can be created?
Well, first thing, you have to know the different parts of your brain, because otherwise everybody's just a collage in there, and it's like a soup, and this part speaks, and then this part reacts, and then this part is experiential, and then there are these different parts. So when I talk about the different parts of the brain, these are actual neuroanatomical groups of cells. So as we develop these 2 emotional groups of cells, one in each hemisphere, and then above that comes in new tissue, which is the thinking tissue. So I talk about the 4 characters. And so character number 1 is what I use to delineate the rational thinking part of our left brain. So when we think about we're creating order in the world, it categorizes and organizes, it likes to be the boss. It's all about judgment, because through judgment, we can differentiate between a this and a that, and then we can put them in different categories. And this is the part of our brain that defines what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is the social norm that is acceptable, and it's the boss. Generally, this is our alpha type personality. We all have one, but think of your children. Maybe some of them are really, really bossy, and maybe some of them, they just kind of like, they're artistic and creative, and they don't really care about, I'll eat when you tell me to eat, whatever. So they're different people, have different amounts of each of these well developed. But character 1 is what I call that left thinking, rational thinking. But the emotion, which is character 2 of that left hemisphere, this is me, Jill. So Jill Bolte Taylor, I exist in my left hemisphere. There's a tiny group of cells, like a little ego group of cells, that defines who am I. Who are you is your ego, and it's actually a group of cells inside of your brain, about the size of a peanut. And so with that comes, I have language, and I have a past, and I have a future. So I have linearity across time. So Jill Bolte Taylor, have emotional pain from my past, and I have fear of the future. So this is in that emotional tissue, which is what I call character 2. This is the part that worries, and it frets, and it gets angry, and it blames others, and it remembers, oh gosh, tomorrow I didn't do that, or somebody said this to me, and then So when we're sleeping or trying to sleep, think about what these two characters alone are going to do to our sleep, right? The character one, rational thinking, is going to be going, oh, I did A, B, and C. I forgot to do D. I did E and F. So I'm running through my to-do list, right? And it's like, okay, and I'm making judgment. Okay, well, I did that, and so did this, and they didn't do it very well. So I need to like pick up the slack, and I need to do that, and blah, blah, blah. And so you're having this ongoing link conversation inside of your head instead of going to sleep, right? And then the character two, the emotional part, it's not very happy when it lays down generally, or it's very excited. Let's say it was my birthday and we had a great party and it was like, oh my gosh, and I'm so excited. And it was like, yeah, and that was great. And this was great. And I don't know why they did that drink though. I didn't want that. And and man, right? Language in that left hemisphere. So we have to figure, and this is also our stress circuitry. Things aren't good enough. I always want more. It always wants more, and it's never good enough, right? So if your dad or your parent comes in and says, it's not good enough, it's not good enough, it's not good enough, and then we train ourselves, that's not good enough. And then I hear, I'm not good enough because whatever I'm producing isn't good enough. And so we end up with all this soup of who am I? And so in my left hemisphere, and then I lay down and go to sleep. And how on earth am I going to go to sleep? Because I got all this stuff going on, right? I'm reanalyzing life, and it's in my interference. Okay, so that's the left brain. The right hemisphere isn't anything like that, because the right hemisphere doesn't have language as words. Instead, it's right here, right now. And one of the most miraculous things about being a human being is we have the capacity to say, in this moment, I'm going to bring my mind to the present moment. I'm going to feel the temperature of the air. Okay, I'm going to focus on my breath. This is why all the meditation is like a multi-billion-dollar market. Bring your mind to your breath, because we breathe in the present moment. So focus on your breath. And as soon as you do that, if I'm thinking about my breath and I'm right here, right now, I'm not thinking about my shoes and why I picked those this morning. Right? Or I'm not thinking about somebody who criticized me, or I'm not thinking about what I need to do when I'm not on here with you guys. So it brings my mind to the present moment in the right hemisphere. So now the emotional tissue, experiential tissue, is what does it feel like in this present moment to be alive? So let's say I'm going to dive into the lake, and I'm going to feel in the present moment the pressure of the water against my body. I'm going to feel the temperature of the water. I'm going to feel that water is wet, right? I feel water is wet in the present moment. So that's what I call character 3. That's the emotional limbic tissue of that right hemisphere in the right here, right now. And then the thinking tissue of that right hemisphere is actually designed to be completely in the present moment, without judgment and with only awe that, oh my gosh, I'm alive. I exist at all. This is where my gratitude, my sense of gratitude, my sense of feeling connected to the bigger picture, my openness and the expansiveness and the rainbow. Where do we go when we feel a rainbow and that excitement of, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful? Or inevitably when we see dolphins swim by, it's like, oh my gosh, there's something about that energetic that lifts us up and raises us into a sense of gratitude. So we end up with these 4 very different parts of our brain, and we can identify which one we're in at any moment, or which one is gnawing on us, wanting us to do something. And the power of knowing whole brain living is when I can differentiate these 4 different parts of who I am. I can use the brain huddle, the tool, to bring them into communication with one another, so I become a democracy. Who and how do I want to be in this moment? Who and how do I want to be in 10 minutes when I'm doing something else? Who and how am I in any moment? And when I know myself that well, then this is total personal freedom, because then I have the power to pick and choose who and how I want to be. And if I want to go to sleep, I know what that means.
If I want to go to sleep, we want to be in the right side, right? We want to be on the right side of the brain, preferably in emotional gratitude zone, what we're thankful and we
Yeah.
breathe and
Yeah. Yeah. Because if I know my four characters, then I can say to my left brain, I am so grateful that you exist inside of my head. I'm so grateful because when I didn't have a left hemisphere, I was completely non-functional. So I want to be a functional human being, but I know the power of sleep. I know the value of sleep. And so I negotiate that, okay, with my left hemisphere, I know you want to calculate that and you want to be analytical, but I need to bring myself to the present moment. And this is why people do meditation before they go to sleep, because it brings them to their breath. It brings them to having squeezing different muscles, different parts of their body. Different people will listen to vibrational frequencies that bring them into mindsets that are not about the analytical or about the worrisome. And really, that's why these tools work. And if somebody comes in and says, oh, I've tried everything and it doesn't work, it's like, you might need a little coaching, because these things do work. And it's a matter of, yes, you can train yourself to have new cognitive and emotional habits.
No, that's beautiful. And I want to mention what you have a light behind you, what actually create the frequency from our friend Deacon Foddy, Mr. Terry Moore. So he make a big influence in the brain development. And thank you to him for introducing us. I want to mention that on the interview because I'm gonna make him. I want to express that gratitude from my right brain, from emotional and cognitive character. But now I want to ask you practical question as a clinician.
Yeah.
I want you to talk about different generation brain influence. And of course, actually I didn't realize it that clear until I read your book, how historical events shape our brain development into dominance, certain dominant characters. Please talk about that, how, baby boomers and Gen X different from other generations, and how to present I want maybe first if you talk about difference in the generation, because my second question, and I want specifically make it separate question about treatment presentation and treatment technique, what suitable or more interesting for different generations.
Yeah. So when you consider we the human, I am a human. I have this right hemisphere and this left hemisphere. I have two thinking and I have two emotional groups of cells. And I'm a boomer. So what that really means from a brain perspective is that my brain, when I went to school, my brain learned different tools like language, like mathematics, through the skill set of the left hemisphere. So language is in the left hemisphere. Numbers are in the left hemisphere. So when I learned 2 + 2 = 4, I learned the symbol 2 plus the symbol 2 equals the symbol 4. And when I memorized my multiplication tables, I just memorized my multiplication tables, right? 12 times 12 is whatever it is. And this was just rote memory, and we learned it and we practiced it, and then we could apply it and use it. So that's very different than our children, who are now going to be the millennials. And Gen X is right behind the boomers. And right behind the boomers, they were the first population that came in that really used technology. So back in the 80s and 90s, when everything was really generating through the birth of the internet, we had computers, that was all the new beginning. Well, this was the population, a kid, they were the gadgets, right? They wanted all the gadgets, and they'd get these and they just push buttons. They had no fear, and they just push all those buttons, and then they'd figure out how things work, and they'd push more buttons. And then it was amazing the things that they could do. And we, the boomers, are looking at these computers going, I don't want to push the wrong button because I'm going to lose it all. Right. So we were looking at how to use the machine, and we were afraid we were going to lose things. While the kids, the Gen Xers, they were coming in and they were just pushing the buttons, figuring it all out, and then expanding it. So they were actually in the guts of the machine. So they became really proficient with technology. So we would take all of our stuff to them, and they were our IT people. And then the next generation, though, are the millennials. And this is an enormous number of kids because there were a whole bunch of boomers and we had a whole bunch of children. And so the millennials come in, but by this point, technology is already really moving forward. And we're there. You remember the little Teddy Raskin, the little bear? This was a little bear. And many of our millennial children, we would give them these and they would cuddle these in their little cradle, and it kept them company, and it would and it would talk.
Yeah.
And you know, they did. This was the beginning of technology, us living with technology. And so what happened then with the rest of this generation is programs started being built so that we could use the computer screens to train our millennial children. And instead of a 2 number plus a 2 number equals 4, they would have 2 chickens plus 2 cows equals 4 animals. And it was like, oh, it was visual. It was story. It was different than just the symbolism. So we train these children now, our millennial children, through their right hemisphere. So we train them left hemisphere skills through the tools of their right hemisphere. So they're really much more right brain than we are. And it shows.
That's such a revelation. That's such a revelation.
Yeah.
And then now I would like to ask you my last question about treatment strategies.
Yeah.
Treatment strategies, what would be better for baby boomers? And I don't know, Gen X, what it's in the middle.
Right.
And a generation would go after, like Gen Z, Alpha, millennials.
Well, for the boomers and most of the Gen X, I mean, we were brought up in a culture of let's fix it now, let's fix it with a pill, right? Or cut it out, right? But I want instant gratification. I mean, that's what boomers really are all about. We're about instant gratification, and then we had children, and then we wanted them to have more than we had, but they're different than we are. And I think that there's 2 ways of looking at this. One is through the generational lens, and one is through the 4 characters lens, because you're going to have all 4 character dominant in each of these populations. But in the boomer population, the older population, you're going to have more left brain dominant. And in the millennial population, you're going to have more right brain dominant, but they still have good left brain skill sets, right? So, but the right brain is about, let me take the big picture of what is my health, and let me figure out how to tweak different pieces of it so that over the long term, I can acquire a very healthy way of being. That doesn't scare me. I don't need the instant gratification. But the boomer population is, it's broken, I need to fix it. Let's fix it, and then I can move on, right? So we have very different ways of looking at ourselves, but also generationally, there is an enormous difference in different populations.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate so much wisdom we got. So again, I highly recommend to my audience to listen to your TED Talk and read both books. Like, it's create so much more understanding of yourself, of the person inside of you, with all the doubts and goals and way to accomplish that. You know, I think it's like a magnifying glass, but inside.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So thank you very much for your great work, Doctor. And I really appreciate what you find the time to come to my channel and share with my audience this grain of wisdom.
Thank you.